This morning we're going to be wrapping up our series that we've been doing for the last couple of weeks together called But God. And the way we're going to do that is by reading Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. Luke chapter 5, verses 1 to 11. If you're wondering to yourself, well, who is Luke and why do we care what he has to say about Jesus? Well, Luke was Paul, the Apostle Paul, who we talked about last week, was his personal doctor, traveled with Paul wherever he went, and that gave Luke access to a whole bunch of people who knew Jesus personally, not just who had heard about Jesus, but who actually knew him, who were eyewitnesses to everything that he did and said, who were eyewitnesses to the events of his death and his resurrection. And at one point in Luke's life, a man named Theophilus said, "Hey, Luke, I need you to do a research project on this Jesus guy." And so Luke goes and interviews all kinds of eyewitnesses and does a research project called what ends up being the Gospel of Luke. And he says right at the beginning, the reason I wrote this stuff down was so that you could be sure about the stuff that you've heard about. I know you've heard some things about Jesus. I know some people have told you some things. I did the research. I want to tell you the truth about Jesus. And the Gospel of Luke is that account. So, chapter 5. One day as Jesus was standing by the lake of Gennesaret, the people were crowding around him and they were listening to the word of God that he was teaching. He saw at the water's edge, Jesus saw two boats left by the fishermen. And the fishermen weren't gone. The fishermen were sitting on the beach washing their nets. Jesus got into one of the boats, the one belonging to Simon Peter, and asked him to put out a little from shore. And then Jesus sat down and he taught the people. You know how you can hear really well somebody who sits in a boat on the water and their voice just naturally carries? Jesus used the water like a natural megaphone. He sat down and taught the people from the boat. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, "Put out into deeper water and let down the nets for a catch." Simon answered, basically, at first, no. He says, "Master, we've worked hard all night. We haven't caught anything." And Jesus gives him a stone face. Like, do it. But because you say so, I will let down the nets. And when they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. And so they signaled to their partners in the other boat to come and help them. And they came and they filled both boats so full that the boats began to sink. That's how many fish were in the boat. And Peter seems to be completely oblivious to the sinking situation going on. And he falls at Jesus. When Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' feet, at his knees, and said, "Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish that they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee. They were Simon's partners, the guys in the other boat. And then Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Don't be afraid." In other words, don't worry. Don't be afraid. From now on, you will fish for people, which is a weird thing to say. It is. It's a little bit of a weird thing to say, but we'll get into it. And so they pulled their boats up on shore, and they left everything and followed him. Let's pray to ask God to speak to us as we reflect on Luke's account. Father in heaven, we pray that the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts on this scripture reading, Lord, we pray that it would be pleasing to you and beneficial to our lives. Lord, I pray that the good news of the gospel, the heart of the Christian faith would be crystal clear so that for those of us who think we know it so well that we can be refreshed by it, and for those of us who aren't so sure, who are on the fence when it comes to anything related to you, Jesus, we pray that you would move us in faith to follow you. We pray this in Jesus' name. And everyone said, amen. Michael Hyatt used to be the CEO of Thomas Nelson Publishing, and now he runs a business consulting firm. He taught on one of his podcasts these two words that have really kind of struck me and impacted my life quite a bit. The two words are this: limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs. A limiting belief is something that you believe about yourself that keeps you or limits you from going to the places or becoming the person that you want to be, or you dreamed you could be, or that you've always longed to be, or that you really think God's calling you to be. A limiting belief is a belief that you have that there's some detail in your life that disqualifies you from reaching a particular goal. Last week I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said to me, "Corey, I could never run a marathon. I don't have the lung capacity. I don't have the leg strength. I don't have the stamina. I die." That's a limiting belief. That's a limiting belief. Now, limiting beliefs could be true, and they can be false. It's true she doesn't have the lung capacity. It's true she doesn't have the leg muscles yet. It's true. But it's false to believe that she couldn't do it. It's false to think, I think it's false to say that I die. No, she probably wouldn't die. Now, sometimes our limiting beliefs are non-consequential. They don't matter like that, right? I mean, she told me after the conversation, I don't really want to run a marathon, so it doesn't really impact me. But really, limiting beliefs, no matter whether they matter to you or not, they always keep you from going to the places or becoming the person that you want to be. And now that you know what it is, listen for it. You will hear it in conversations absolutely everywhere. I could never be a good artist. I'm not that creative. I could never be a good parent. I'm not responsible enough. I could never get a steady job. No one will hire me. I could never buy a house that's only for wealthy people. I could never go to grad school. I'm not smart enough. I could never talk in front of this many people. I'd get too nervous. I could never get up in the early. I'm not a morning person. I could never shop there or look like that or be a part of that group. I don't have the time. Limiting beliefs are absolutely everywhere. And sometimes it's true. They don't matter. For my friend, it doesn't make that big of a difference that she's limiting herself from running a marathon. Who cares whether she runs the marathon or not? But sometimes your limiting beliefs matter a lot. Like, I could never be that disciplined in health or exercise. I'll be stuck in this state forever. I could never fix that relationship. It's hopeless. It'll be stuck this way. Things won't ever be any different. I can never talk to my parents about that issue. They just wouldn't understand. I'm too busy to go on vacation. I'm too busy providing for my family to be present for them. I just don't have the time. Limiting beliefs. Limiting beliefs. Our lives are filled with them. And I think in a lot of ways, as I've reflected over the last 3 weeks of doing this series together, I think in a lot of ways, this whole series has been about spiritually limiting beliefs. The whole series has been about the things that we believe about God that keep us from going to the places that He wants us to go or becoming the people He wants us to be. Like we started out by saying, God's not interested. The phrase we keep using is this phrase, people like me. God's not interested in people like me. People for whom life never really works out. That's my proof. Some people get blessed by God. I'm not one of those people. Life never goes the way I want it to. God must not be interested in me. Or 2 weeks ago when we talked about the idea that God's not interested in people like me, people who have wandered too far, who have sinned too much, people who are too distant from God to decide to turn and follow. Or the idea last week that we talked about that God's not interested in people like me, people who are not interested in God, or maybe even people who are opposed to God. I think we have all of these limiting beliefs as possible. Some of you have limiting beliefs about yourself spiritually, that you disconnect or disqualify yourself from a relationship with God. If you're a Christian in this room, if you're already a follower of Jesus, I'd be the first to admit that sometimes I have limiting beliefs about God that disqualify or disconnect other people. God's not interested in people like them, I think to myself, incorrectly. And today I want to tackle one more limiting belief, because every single week we've busted those beliefs. We've busted those beliefs because I think every time I open the Bible, my idea of the type of person that God is interested in, that box of people gets busted. And so we're going to do one more today. The belief I want to bust today is the idea that God is not interested in people like me, people who aren't super spiritual, people who aren't all that religious, people who aren't all that pious. You know, there's some people who are good at being religious. There's some people who are good at talking in front of people or doing music in front of people, or some people are really good at talking about their faith. Some people are really good at praying, and some people are really good at reading their Bible, but God might want to use them. God might be interested in people like them, but He's not interested in people like me. I'm not really pious enough. I'm not spiritual enough. God's not interested in people like me. And if you've ever thought this way, or you love someone who's ever thought this way, two things. Number one, you're not alone. If you've ever thought you're not religious enough for God to be interested in you, I want you to know, number one, you're not alone. And number two, this message is for you. The way we're going to bust this box, this belief, is by looking and reflecting on the life of the person that we read about this morning, Simon Peter. Now, if you're familiar with the New Testament, if you're familiar with the Bible, or you've been to church in your life, you may know who Simon Peter is. You may know that he was one of Jesus' 12 disciples. Lots of people followed Jesus around in the first century, but he chose 12 people specifically to pour into. And then even from those 12 people, he really only spent a ton of time with 3 of them. And Peter was one of those 3. And eventually, Peter became one of the major leaders of the Christian movement, the Jesus movement, that eventually toppled an empire. So Peter's regarded as a huge figure, a pillar in the Christian faith. And sometimes we think of Peter as this boisterous, leap before you look type guy, this guy who left everything to follow Jesus. And he's kind of like a spiritual superhero of the faith. But that's not actually true. In fact, the first couple of times that Peter met Jesus, he didn't even start following him. The first few times Peter met Jesus, he kind of just saw and then walked away. It took a few interactions before Peter went full-time follower. Started with his brother Andrew, actually. His brother Andrew was a far more pious and religious guy. I mean, Andrew spent his time fishing at night, and then during the day, he would go and follow around this preacher named John who baptized all kinds of people. And one day while Andrew was following John around, listening to him preach, Andrew and John ran into Jesus. And John said to Andrew, "Stop following me and start following that guy. That's the guy who you need to live and love like. That's the guy you need to pattern your life after. That's the guy who's got the information about God that you're looking for." And so Andrew started following Jesus. And after a very short amount of time following Jesus, he thought to himself, "Man, my brother Peter's got to know this guy." And so he grabs Peter and he takes him to Jesus. And Jesus and Peter have this very short interaction where Peter says, "Hey," and Jesus says, "Peter, you are," and he pays him this compliment, and he says really nice things to him. And that's it. And Peter walks away. And he doesn't go full-time follower. He doesn't start following Jesus right away. Actually, right before the passage we read, you can read it later if you want, in chapter 4, Andrew tries again, and he brings Jesus over to Peter's house. And they're having a meal at Peter's house, and Peter's mother-in-law is there, and she's kind of helping serve the food, but she starts feeling really sick, and so Jesus heals Peter's mother-in-law. And then the word gets out really quickly that there's a healer, Jesus, at Peter's house, and all kinds of people start flooding to the house, and Jesus kind of co-ops Peter's home and turns his home into a hospital of healing for people all day long. But Peter didn't start following Jesus yet. Even after seeing that, he still didn't start following Jesus. It wasn't until the incident on the lake, when Jesus was preaching and Peter was cleaning up the nets, pulling all the beer cans and the boots from the net that they caught the night before because they didn't catch any fish. Pulling everything out of the nets, cleaning them all up, folding them just right. And Jesus is preaching, and there are so many people there kind of crowding around that he's kind of backing up closer and closer to the water. And he looks at Peter and says, "Look, can I borrow your boat? I don't want to do the whole walk on water thing with you yet. We'll do it later. Can I borrow your boat?" And so Peter says, "All right." And then he gets a couple of his buddies from his crew, and they paddle out a little bit, and Jesus finishes preaching and teaching. And then he looks at Peter and says, "Let down your net. And I want you to appreciate the humor of this just for a minute. You ever have somebody show up on your job site, Joe, and start telling you how to do your job? Come on, never. Come on, we talked. Is anybody a building inspector here? Awesome. You ever had a building inspector show up and you're working on a deck and you want to put like a love seat bench in there maybe, and suddenly the building inspector shows up, starts telling you what you can and what you can't do and how and why. It's terrible to have somebody show up and start telling you how to do your. You ever had somebody unsolicited give you advice on how to parent your kids? Right? It's not fun having somebody show up out of nowhere and start telling you how to do your job. Just appreciate the humor with me for a moment, that Jesus turns to Peter and says, let down your nets, let's go fishing. And Peter says no at first. He says, look, we've been fishing all night, which, by the way, is when you go fishing. We've been fishing all night. We already cleaned out the nets. We already folded them up. We're not doing this again. Let's do this, Jesus. How about I'll show you my hands and you show me yours? You notice the difference? See how mine are covered in all kinds of scrapes and scars and all the calluses from me throwing these nets out and taking them back in and throwing these nets out and taking them back in. Let's look at your hands, preacher man. You talk for a living. You go around the town. You go around the city, and you don't do this kind of work. Yeah, you used to be a carpenter, but not anymore. Jesus, don't tell me how to do my job. And Jesus gives him nothing. And so he says, fine, because you say so. In other words, you're about to be embarrassed. Like, this is on you. And he throws out the nets. And he catches so much fish that apparently he can take the next 3 years off of work and follow Jesus. He catches so much fish that the boats start to sink. The other boat comes over and helps. And it's like Peter doesn't even notice. He falls at Jesus' feet. And he utters the most spiritually limiting belief that I think many of us hold for ourselves too. He says, Jesus, go away from me, for I am a sinful man. Now, I get that the idea of the word sin, I mean, that's got a lot of baggage in our culture today. Nobody likes being called a sinner. Andy, you're a sinner. Sorry. That's not fun. No, we don't like that. It's got all kinds of baggage attached to this idea of like being a sinful person. You're a sinner. You kind of judgmental, self-righteous Christian people say that to other people. But here's the thing. The word, just stick with me for a minute, the word behind the word sinner, the Greek word for it is the word hamartolos. Hamartolos. Hamartolos means to miss the mark. It's when you set up to shoot an arrow and then you let it fly and it just misses the target. In other words, Peter says, Jesus, go away from me. I'm a hamartolos type person. I missed the mark. And he doesn't even say anything specific. It's not like, Jesus, go away from me. I'm a miss the mark kind of person in my spiritual life. No, it's just in general. I'm a miss the mark kind of person, Jesus. That's just it across the board. In my career, in my job, in my education growing up, I'm a miss the mark kind of person. I'm a miss the mark kind of person in my relationships, with my relationship with my wife, my relationship with my friends, the relationship with the people I've worked with. I'm a miss the mark kind of guy, Jesus. And I definitely am a miss the mark kind of guy spiritually. I mean, I'm not the guy you're looking for. Maybe you want somebody more like Andrew. Andrew's pious. Andrew follows you at night and works for me, or follows you during the day and works for me at night. Maybe you want somebody like Andrew, somebody more pious, somebody more religious, somebody more spiritual. I am not the droid you're looking for. This isn't it. I'm not your guy. And Jesus says, don't worry about it. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. I'll teach you to fish for people, which is a weird thing to say. But really what Jesus is saying, what he's getting at is like, Peter, I know you're pretty sure you know how the ways of fish. You can only catch them at night. I'm also pretty sure you think you know the ways of God and the type of people that God is interested in. But I've come so that people will know what God's really like. I've come so that people will know what God's kingdom, heaven, is really like. I've come so that people can know what life can actually really be like. And I want to tell that message to ordinary, miss the mark everyday people like you. And if I want to share that message of what God is really like with ordinary, everyday, miss the mark people, I'm going to need an ordinary, everyday, miss the mark type person. You see, Peter, it's your admission of fault that's actually your admission to faith. Your admission to faults in your life is actually the beginning. It's your admission. It's your entrance ticket to faith. So follow me. And Peter left his nets and his boat, and he followed Jesus. He didn't do it instantly the first time he ever met Jesus. It took a few interactions. But he left everything and followed him. And he had no idea where it was going to lead. He had no idea what his life was going to look like. He had no idea that he would follow Jesus up a mountain and see two people who had died long ago in history. He had no idea that he would see Jesus heal people, that he would see blind people suddenly have their sight restored, and deaf people who couldn't hear suddenly have their hearing restored, and paralyzed people who had never walked in their life been able to be healed and able to dance around. He had no idea that he was going to see all that. He had no idea what he was going to listen to, the messages he would hear from Jesus. He had no idea what he himself would end up doing. He had no idea that he was going to stand up and profess his devotion to Jesus, and then a few hours later deny Jesus. He had no idea that someday he would be lying about the fact that he actually knew Jesus. He had no idea that he would watch Jesus get brutally murdered. He also had no idea that as he hid for 3 days, God was doing something. He had no idea that 3 days after Jesus died, some of his friends would come to him and say the tomb that he was buried in was empty, and that he would go running to that tomb and stick his head in and see nothing. He had no idea that he would have breakfast on the beach with Jesus just a few days later. He had no idea that he would go fishing for people where he normally wouldn't choose, when he normally wouldn't choose to go fishing. Jesus made him fish in the middle of the day when you don't usually catch fish. You know what Jesus led him to do later? To go into the house of a Gentile person, which would have been completely offensive and absolutely not allowed for Peter's religious life as a Jewish person. He would go into a Gentile's house and he would share the message of Jesus and baptize them as they became followers of Jesus. He would become one of the pillars of a movement that would eventually topple an empire and change the world. He didn't know any of that. All he knew was that he was a hamartolos. He was a miss the mark kind of guy. Friends, this is the good news of the Christian faith. Christianity is not a religion filled with people who think they are better than everyone else. If they do, they don't get it. The Christian faith, admission to this faith, starts with admitting our faults. You can't be a disciple of Jesus and think you know everything. To be a disciple means to be a learner. You can't be a learner if you think you have nothing to learn. It starts with admitting your faults and that you've got a lot to learn. At some point, I had to realize in my own life that I don't measure up to God's standard for how human beings ought to operate. I don't. And the truth is, I didn't need a miraculous catch of fish, and you don't need a miraculous catch of fish to know that you're a hamartolos, that I'm a hamartolos. I know I don't measure up to God's standard because I don't even measure up to my own standards for how I think people should operate. And that drives a wedge between me and God. That's what we call sin, when we miss the mark in life. I miss the mark all the time relationally, in my personal moral integrity, in my job. And I'd guess that if you really thought about it for yourself, you'd throw your hand up and say, I'm a hamartolos too. And when we miss the mark, it drives a wedge between us and God. Not because God's like grossed out by your sin, that God's like, ew, he's a sinner, I don't want to be near him. But it's because God's anger towards your sin is because of what your sin does to you and what your sin does to others. It kills us. That's why we say around here that the punishment for sin is death. I mean, if you thought about it long enough, isn't that just true? When you miss the mark relationally, isn't there like a little death in the relationship? When you miss the mark in your personal moral integrity, it's just a little bit of a death. Death is the result of sin. It drives a wedge between us and others and ultimately us and God. But the good news of the gospel and the heart of the Christian faith is that God was not content to leave that distance, but instead he put on flesh, coming in the person of Jesus, so that you could know the love of God, so that I could know the grace and mercy of God, so that I could know and you could know that God is still interested in people like you, people who are not all that religious, people who are not super pious or not super spiritual. He's still interested in people like you. He's still inviting people like you and people like me to follow him, to follow Jesus. So will you do it? Will you let him co-opt your house and turn it into a hospital for healing? Will you let him co-opt your job to be an opportunity to fish for people, to share the message of what God is really like? Will you let him co-opt your life? See, to be honest with you, I don't really know what that looks like for you. I don't know what's going to happen when you let Jesus co-opt your home. You start opening it up, not just to your family, not just to your friends, but you start opening it up to people who could really use a loving place to hang out. I don't know what's going to happen if you start letting Jesus co-opt your job as an opportunity to start sharing his life and love with people who need to hear about it. I don't know what's going to happen if you let him co-opt your life. But neither did Peter. He had no idea what was going to happen. He ended up being a pillar in a movement that changed the world. I think Jesus is still inviting people to be a part of that change. So will you go? Will you follow him? Corey, what does that look like? Give me some handles. Make it practical. For some of you, following the next step might just mean coming back next week. This was your first time here, and you're not really sure about this whole thing, this whole gathering thing. I mean, I saw beer taps in the back. How does that relate? It doesn't for now. What does this mean for me? Well, maybe you just need to come back next week. Maybe the next step for you is to say, I've never been a disciple. I've heard about it. I've gone to church, but I've never been a disciple. I've never had somebody walk with me one-on-one to teach me about the life and love of Jesus and help me understand the message of the Christian faith in a way that I could share it with other people in a way that would change my life and change the lives of others. Well, then come talk to me so we can get you connected with somebody who can disciple you. Maybe it means joining with a group of people. We've got house gatherings here. People who commit to learning to live and love like Jesus. Maybe you need to join a house gathering. And if you're thinking to yourself, I'm on board. I'll leave my nets and my boat. I'll let Jesus co-opt my life. But here's the thing, Corey, I'm not really all that sure. What do I say to people? How do I interact with people? What do I do when I finally meet somebody and I have the opportunity to share? I'm not good with words. I'm not a preacher. I'm not well versed in the language. I don't know what I'm supposed to do or what I'm supposed to say. Great. You should come back next week. Next week we start a brand new series called Don't Be Weird. Yeah. It's my wife's title. Don't be weird. She spends her days surrounded by people who need the message of Jesus and have rejected God in their lives. And every time she has the opportunity to share, she says to herself, don't be weird, don't be weird, don't be weird, don't be weird. please, Lord, let me not be weird so that they will hear me. We're going to start a new series called Don't Be Weird, where we talk about being present in people's lives, the posture that we have to have towards others, and finally, how to preach the message. It's not just my job to preach the message. Jesus is calling everyday, ordinary people like me and like you to preach the message, to talk about the life and love of Jesus. So will you go? Or will you come? I hope you will. Let's pray. Father in heaven, we thank you so much for your willingness to use everyday, ordinary, hamartolos people like us. People, Lord, who often miss the mark. Lord, I pray for any of us here who have never had that moment where we've decided, yeah, you know what, I do miss the mark. I need the grace of God shown in through Jesus. Lord, I pray for any of us here who know the grace but have not yet decided to follow. We've had a few interactions with Jesus, but we haven't yet decided to become full-time followers. Lord, I pray that you would move in their hearts now, that they would sense you drawing them closer, inviting them to a life that really they have no idea how it's going to turn out. But neither did Peter, neither did I. But you did. And you used people like Peter to change the world. And you are still calling people like us to be a part of bringing that world-changing message of the life and love of Jesus. So, Lord, I pray that you would shower us with your mercy and your grace, humble us by your forgiveness, and send us out as messengers to tell a world that desperately needs to know what you are really like and what their lives could really be like. Give us clarity, Lord. Give us the boldness to ask to be discipled so that we can grow and continue to learn what it means to be a follower of you. We pray this in Jesus' name, and all God's people said.